Hello, this is Angelia, and you are listening to or watching the podcast, Why You Do What You Do. The podcast that talks about human development and psychology to maybe help you figure out a little bit more about why you do what you do. And today we're going to be talking about how do older adults fare financially. That's something that everybody is going to have to worry about. Everyone's going to retire at some point, hopefully. And you got to know, are you going to be okay? So, especially people, in my age group who are getting up there, their 50s and 60s, we know that we're going to be able to live. So, even Jimmy and Rosalind Carter had to face financial issues after retirement. And, we read about that earlier on another podcast, and this is true. It's a big decision whether you're going to retire or not, and your finances definitely is something that you have to take into consideration. So do most older adults. So, most older adults, are going to face this decision. Do I retire? Do I not retire? 9 out of 10 older Americans receive Social Security benefits, and nearly 2 out of 3 report income from assets. So, like I say, a lot of people depend on Social Security. They've paid into it, all their work life, and they depend on it being a source of income when they retire. I know we do. If we don't have it, there's going to be a big problem because, the 401k is not enough to live on for the rest of our lives. And, my husband, he can barely work now. I can't work outside of home now except for, like I'm getting ready to teach a class, for Chinese watercolors up at Studio Work. So, that's about all I'm up to. So we already know if that's not coming in, we're in trouble. So, and he has a retirement account through his work. I have a small retirement account that is not big enough we can live on for sure. So, we're hoping that it's still, Social Security is still going to be there when we retire because, it's going to be a bit of a problem if it's not there. Other sources of income include pensions, and, that is a rare company today that anybody gets a pension. My parents' generation, everybody got a pension. You worked your 25 years, you got your pension, you're good. That's not the case anymore. So, those were the days, as they say. Earnings from work, and again, we put 10% of our paychecks into savings, and then we tithe 10% to kind of try and have a little cush, but it's not going to be enough to support us for the rest of our lives. And public assistance. Now, years ago, when I was a single mom, I was on public assistance, but of course we make too much money now for me to be on public assistance, so we're not getting anything, that way. For Americans born after 1937, the age of eligibility for full Social Security benefits is scheduled to rise gradually from 65 to 67, and it already has for our generation. My husband can retire at 62, but he gets a much decreased rate unless he waits till he's 67. So, like I said, my mom took it at 62. His back and his hips and yeah. He really could and should, but he's not because he don't want to have that less amount of money coming in. He wants to have the most money he can. So, I'm just praying he can make it as long as he can to 67 like he wants to. That's only, 5 years, so we're hoping. This change was predicated on the rise in life expectancy because we're living longer. People are living into their 80s and 90s and hundreds, like they did a long time ago, not like in the past, 200 years. Back in the 1700s, you lived to be 30, 40 years old. You were old. I look at some of the death notices in my genealogy, and they lived to a ripe old age of 42. What? Wow. So back then, that was old. But now we're getting a lot older. Decreases in mortality. And again, We have immunizations, so that people aren't dying from, random diseases that, we have ability to stop. So, the mortality rate, is much higher. I know my mother got polio when she was a little kid, and I know other people's, families, their parents had gotten polio. But, in my generation, there was no polio. They didn't wipe that out. Now we had chicken pox. And my youngest son went, my oldest two by the time my youngest son went and get his immunizations, they had the chicken pox vaccine. So, he didn't have to get it. And improvements in health among older adults. Because there are, more drugs for different things, better drugs for different things. We're going through drug problems right now with my mother-in-law. So, that is definitely a way that older folks are living longer. Excuse me, my dad jokes about, him and his brother talking about, why are we living so long? And he's like, modern medicine. So, excuse me. Our country's kind of top heavy right now because the generations behind us aren't having kids at the rate that the boomers and we did, so it's not looking great. Social Security and other government programs, such as Medicare, which cover basic health insurance for people on Social Security, have enabled today's older adults, as a group, to be about as well off financially as younger and middle-aged adults, and their median net worth is well above the national average. So, these plans came into effect to help people, and they do help people. If it wasn't for Medicare, a lot of older folks would probably not have health care. So, that is a good thing that we're doing for our workers who spent their life working. That way they don't have to spend all of their money and they can have a little income. Like I said, my grandma told me, you'll never have any money until you're in your 50s and get your house paid for and your cars. And she was right. We never had a dime. We didn't have 2 dimes to rub together until we got the house paid for. So, she was right about that. Between 1959 and 2000, the proportion of older Americans living in poverty dropped from 35% to 10.2%. So that's a pretty good drop. These programs that people fuss about are doing some good for our older Americans. They're keeping them, alive and healthy and, having some money to spend to keep the economy going. Older women, especially if they are single, widowed, or divorced, are more likely than older men to live in poverty. And I can tell you that from being a single mom for 8 years. Women don't make as much as men doing the same job. And anyone who says they does is not living in the real world. So it's harder. And women who are single or divorced or widowed usually have children. If they had children. But most of them did. Not all of them did, but most of them did. So then that's people they have to raise, and that costs money. No one is going to, take care of your kid for free, unless there's a reason that you can't work at all, and, you go on full public assistance, and you're living in Section 8 housing, and you get all your benefits. There are people like that, but mostly not. So, us women have a harder time, and a lot of us live in poverty. And older African Americans and Hispanic Americans are more than twice as likely as older white Americans to do so. So there's still a disparagement, still an income gap between, the European descended folks and the other folks in this country. So that is not good for our minority folks. And there are a lot of people who end up out on the street, a lot of old folks. I mean, you see some every now and then. and they usually die there. So, that's a sad thing. I mean, our government spends so much money on so many things, but it's like, we have homeless folks wandering the street. Other countries have built tiny houses for these folks and let them have their own like little village and stuff. Why aren't we doing that? It's working over there. Why aren't we doing it? Because we don't want to do it. It's not a popular cause. Although fewer older people live in poverty today, an estimated 30% of 60-year-olds will spend at least a year below the poverty line. And that's, again, depending on your finances. Like I say, I don't believe in going into debt if you don't have the money. There are folks who buy homes that they can't afford, cars that they can't afford, keeping up with the Joneses, and really that's just digging your own hole, because there'll come a time when you are going to want to retire and things, and you have all this money going out and not all this money coming in. So our motto, and a good motto, is you live within your budget. You make a budget. And there's credit counseling places, and you can even Google it online, I'm sure, on how to make a budget. And you make your budget and you stick in your budget. Then you don't spend money you don't have. And then once you get your house paid for, it's up to you if you want to move or not. We thought about it. I personally would have, just to have central air and central heat. But we decided we were so close to retirement not to do it. So we're into the point now where we're paying cash for everything. If we don't have the cash for it, we're not buying it. Except, we use charge card when we go on vacation, because most of them won't accept cash. We found that out the hard way when we went to Florida one time and tried to pay them. And they were like, we don't accept cash. And we're like, oh, we thought everybody did that. But anyway, you got to live within your means, because if you don't, once you get older, there's gonna be some backlash. You're not gonna have that money that you had when you were working coming in, and you can't spend as much as you did when you were working and had that money coming in, and that can be a form of cognizant dissonance to folks, because the lifestyle's gonna have to change, or you're just gonna break yourself and be bankrupt. Once poor, older adults are likely to stay poor. And then that's true. Once you get to that point where you're poor, if you don't have steady income coming in, you're going to stay there, because you can't lift yourself out of that. That's just common sense. They may no longer be able to work, and inflation may have eroded their savings and pensions. So there again, if you don't have that money coming in, you can't put it out. So again, that's just common sense. A lot of folks, they get the big expensive houses, the big expensive vehicles, latest clothes, latest jewelry, latest tech, and then they retire and they can't maintain that lifestyle. And then it's, a problem, and they're like, oh my gosh, because they can't. So it's better if you just don't put yourself in that situation to begin with. You live within your means, and then you will have some money, because you will have saved some and you'll put some away, and you're used to living within your means, so it's not that big a deal. Infirm or disabled people often outlive their savings at a time when their medical bills are soaring. And I can attest to that through going with stuff that we're doing now with my mother-in-law. If she didn't have money coming in, she would be going broke. Because, the home she's in costs X amount of money. Then they've upped her care now because she was refusing to eat. And so they're bringing her food, and she was getting confused on what pills to take when, so now they're doing her pills too. So they've upgraded her care, because she does have dementia, and so that's an extra $400 a month for that. So, and that's not counting the pills that cost money. Medicare pays some of it, but not all of it. So, yeah, once you get to a certain age, the cost of your life actually goes up and up. So, that's something to think about before you start putting yourself into debt, is that someday it's just going to be more expensive just for you to live. How will today's middle-aged adults fare financially during retirement? Isn't that a good question? With a growing elderly population and proportionately fewer workers contributing to the Social Security system, because there are more people who are hiring independent contractors, more people doing self-employment and things. So there's not the workers who are contributing like they should. I personally do. When I file my taxes, I do that little thing where you have the Social Security taken out too, because I want to make sure it's there. I ain't gonna be getting a lot, but I'm gonna get something, and it wouldn't be fair for me to not put any in when other people putting in, and then I want to take some out. So, I make sure that I'm paying mine too. It seems likely that benefits in real dollars will not continue to rise and may even decline. And like I said, I feel like our whole Social Security system's been mismanaged for several administrations now. But we need to take care of our older folks. They made the next generation and the next generation and, on and on, because that's what they did. And they worked all their life to support people and help people. So I feel like that needs to be there for them. That's important. It's more important than big jets and things like that. It's more important to take care of these folks. As for private pensions, a shift from defined benefit plans that guarantee a fixed retirement income to riskier defined contribution plans, which are, your 401ks, 403bs, the ones where they're investing in the stock market. We all know the stock market depends on how the stock market's doing. And that's how you know if you get money. Like I said, I look at my account, and for a while there, it just kept dropping, and I was like, oh, okay, thanks, current administration, for doing that to my stuff. But it's gradually getting back there as people realize whatever and go on with their life and continue business. So it's not as good to have your retirement income dependent on the stock market, because if it crashes, you lose money, whereas if there was steady money, that's going to be there. In which benefits depend on returns from invested funds, in making the financial future less certain for many workers. Like I said, the days of pensions, I know people who retired with their pension, got the pension coming in, making good money. Those days are gone. My husband's not going to have a pension. None of my sons where they work has a pension. Nowhere ever worked has a pension. So I don't know anybody who's getting pensions anymore. That was a thing of my grandparents and my parents' day that is pretty much done away with. My father-in-law worked at GE. He retired with his pension and his gold watch, and he was happy about it. But for most of us nowadays, that's not happening. So we're in a much worse place than they were. Still, among a nationally representative sample of 2001 men and women ages 33 to 52, about 60%, chiefly those with higher current incomes, experience confidence in their ability to prepare financially for the future. And of course, if you have a higher income, that's probably more realistic, but for most middle class folks, it's probably going to be a problem, and you're going to have to do some math to make things work out for you. Fewer than a half, 48%, were counting on Social Security as a source of retirement income. And like I said, we're hoping it's going to be there, because if not, we're going to be subsistence living down on the farm we own down in another county. We're going to be eating potatoes out of the ground. So, we're hoping it's going to be there. About 60% were depending on savings and investments. Like I said, we have some savings, we have some investments. Most people I know do. It's not a lot. It's not certainly it's not even as much as we make in a year, so it's not even going to carry us through a year. But, hopefully we will be getting some Social Security, and it will be a little cushion for us to, afford to do something with. And 68% on self-directed retirement plans. Like I say, 401ks, 403bs. I got a little investment account. My son said, hey, you should go to this and get a little investment account. And I said, well, how does it work? And so he showed me, and then I contacted him and said, hey, I'd like to do this. And they're like, sure. And you can start with like as little as like $10, I think. And so, I've been putting in, every time we get paid, and, I got paid just last week. It's good to make a little nest egg for yourself, to set a little away. Because if you're spending everything you're making, there's going to come a day where you're not making as much. And if you spend all that, then you're going to have a problem. So that's something to be thinking about before you retire, is to have a little something set aside, such as IRAs and 401ks. And now one of my sons had a 401k that he rolled over to an IRA at his bank. Is getting more money, and he's telling both my other sons, you should do that, and they probably should do that so they can get some more money. But that's a good idea, is to be preparing for your future. The vast majority, 84%, plan to work at least part-time. So there are 84% of people who believe they'll probably have to work part-time when they retire. I think that's sad. I think that's terrible that our older adults are afraid they're going to have to work part-time. Now, like I said, my husband decided years ago, when he was still 20 years away from retirement, he was going to take his early Social Security and work part-time as like a Walmart greeter or something. Well, he's since changed his mind on that. He's like, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to have to be working and everything for ever. I want to wait and retire, get that coming in when I'm older, so I get the full amount, like I made when I was working, which is not quite, still it's like 100 and some short, but it's close. So but I think that's awful that in a country as rich as the United States of America, there are 84% of people who still believe they'll probably have to work part-time when they get old enough to retire. I think that's a shame. So, we're looking at a little chart here saying the sources of income of Americans aged 65 and older. 40% of them rely on Social Security. 18% rely on asset income. 20% rely on earnings from work. 18% have public and private pensions. Those are the lucky folks. And 4% on other sources. We don't know what those other sources are. We don't know if we want to know what those other sources are. But anyway, as rich a country as we are, it's a shame that, our older folks have to worry about being able to fully retire or have to work part-time or something like that. Other countries have this. We should be looking at what they're doing that works, instead of being, super nationalists, and we're going to do everything our own way, and then you have no idea how to do the things you want to do your way, and so they fail. So, our older adults are going to have to be taken care of financially. So unless we want to go back to a third world country where, you take them into your house and you have to feed and care for them, and then that becomes the next generation's burden, and then you become that next generation's burden, we need to get our stuff together and take care of our older adults here in this country. So hope that helped you figure out maybe a little bit more about why you do what you do. I'm going to leave you there for today. And excuse me, please like and share this educational program so we can spread it around the world. If you want to help me out, subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you want to help me out even more, go to my Patreon page and become a patron. Thanks for watching or listening. That's all for now. Until next time.